All right, we are here today again for some more pulmonary rehab education. So feel free to recline your chair, put your feet up, and enjoy. Welcome to the show of the century. We're going to learn about the respiratory system. Again, the respiratory system. We're going to go over the nasal passages, the pharynx or the throat, the trachea, all the way down to the alveoli. So, hello, this is Oxygen. He's going to be your guide for today, advising you to keep your feet in, your hands inside the ride at all times. So you may be asking yourself, what is the respiratory system? The respiratory system is a system that helps us breathe in and out. Well, we're breathing in the oxygen that can be pumped through your whole body, feeding those muscles, organs, lungs, as well as the carbon dioxide and waste products are all removed from the bloodstream. And another thing to remember or think about is that the respiratory system is made up of many different organs. So initially we see here, this is Oxygen here, and he's about ready to be breathed in through the nasal passage. So here we go. Here's an overview system of the respiratory system, and we'll go on to the next slide here. All right, so here we're going to start with, we have the nasal cavity and the nose, the mouth, the throat, the bronchus, the trachea or the windpipe, of course the lungs, the left lung and the right lung, bronchioles, the ribs, and the diaphragm. So here we go. We are about ready to begin our tour. Here we go. The respiratory system. So we have the nose and the mouth. This is where it all starts, where we first breathe into the oxygen that enters your body, and also where the carbon dioxide leaves the body. When air comes into the nose, it gets filtered by tiny little hairs and moistened by the mucus in your nose. Sinuses also help with that respiratory system. They help to moisten and heat the air that we breathe. As we've talked about, and you would know before, and I've heard many times that I'm a mouth breather, the air can also come in through the body through your mouth or the oral cavity. It just is missing out on a little bit of the filtering when it goes through your mouth as opposed to the nose. So here's a better picture of the nasal and oral cavities. As you see here, you know, the nasal cavity, the nostrils, you'll come in through there. Oral cavity, they all kind of meet back up at the pharynx, often called the throat. So right now, our buddy Oxygen, he's been breathed in there, and he is in the nasal passage right now. So next we're going to head down into the pharynx, or the throat, and the trachea, where the air passes from your nose to your bronchi tubes and the lungs. we'll see here that mark the trachea. The pharynx gathers the air after it passes through your nose or the mouth, and the air is passed down into the trachea or the windpipe. The trachea is kind of a tube thing. It is held open by incomplete rings of cartilage, which without these rings, the trachea could close off and it would be difficult for us. It'd be kind of floppy, and it'd be, you know, like the garden hose, be able to kink up and you wouldn't be able to get any air to and from your lungs. So here we are here in the trachea, making our way down. So from the trachea, it splits into two branches called the bronchi tubes. Again, tubes kind of with cartilage surrounding, keeping those open. These two tubes splitting up and form your bronchiole. Bronchi tubes split up kind of like tree branches do from the trunk. And they get smaller and smaller inside of your lungs. The air flows past your bronchi tubes and into the bronchioles. These tubes keep getting smaller and smaller until finally we end up with the air sacs, which we'll get to at a later time. So here again we have a little bit of a picture here that shows the trachea over there, that the long tube, again, that is held open by those cartilage rings, where it bifurcates into the bronchi tubes to go to either lung. And as that comes down, those bronchi branch into smaller little airways called the bronchioles, and these tiny little grape-like things down here at the end, those are the alveoli. So here we are. Here's our little oxygen boy. He's down here in the bronchi. And now we're going to head over towards the alveoli. And what happens to the air when we finally make it down to those alveoli? The alveoli are tiny little air sacs that, kind of like a balloon, they'll fill up with oxygen when you breathe in, and they are surrounded by tiny, tiny little blood vessels called capillaries. The walls of the alveoli and capillaries are so thin that the oxygen or the carbon dioxide can pass through them, traveling into or out of your bloodstream. And here is a closer picture of an alveoli and the capillaries that are surrounding it. This here is an alveoli, and then we have, of course, you see the wall of the air sac with the capillary that kind of runs right along that. Again, as we breathe in the oxygen, that alveoli kind of expands like a balloon, and the oxygen is picked up by the arterial capillaries and taken out to the rest of your body. At the same time, we have the carbon dioxide from the venous capillaries that is being dropped off into that alveoli. So when we exhale, we can get rid of all that, we call it bad air, or the CO2. So here at the bottom of that is where we find the alveoli, and again where all the gas exchange happens. Here's a little bit simpler picture here of some of the bronchioles, and this is after we've come off the bronchi. This has come down to the bronchioles, to where we get a little bit thinner, little bronchioles here until we get down into the alveolar sac. The blue there on the screen, you know, it's like the capillaries, all the little blood, tiny little blood vessels that are coming to those alveoli, or alveolus as a collective. So our blue little circles here are going to be red blood cells carrying the carbon dioxide. White is chemical change taking place, and red being the blood cell carrying oxygen. We're going to say, you know, that orange line over there is the alveolus, with the blue line being that membrane that lies just between the alveolus and the capillaries. Capillaries being carrying the blood cells. So as oxygen diffuses through the membrane into the bloodstream, carbon dioxide diffuses the membrane and enters the alveolus. So we have the carbon dioxide and the oxygen going in opposing ways. So here we have, you know, another picture here of the airways going into the lungs. Again, over on this side, kind of showing the main respiratory system. The picture in the middle here being the alveoli coming off the smallest little bronchioles, where we have, you know, the deoxygenated blood being left off into those alveoli, and on the other side showing the arterial capillaries, where that oxygenated blood is then pumped and moved through the heart to different organs, tissues, muscles, all in our body. This one over here on the other side here is the alveolar ventilatory surface. Again, showing the wall of the capillary and the oxygen that's going down into that. This being the blue, where it says the air, being the alveoli, with that oxygen diffusing through that membrane. Now we're going to take a look at the diaphragm. And you might be wondering, what does the diaphragm do? The diaphragm, the diaphragm is an important factor in our breathing. The lungs expand and contract in response to changes in pressure inside the chest cavity. So, on inhalation, as you're taking that breath in through there, that diaphragm, you know, flattens out to let those lungs expand and take in a bigger breath. As we exhale, that diaphragm, you know, comes back up into its natural dome-shaped position, to where it's also kind of helping push some of that air out, the exhalation. Here again is another example of that, and maybe a little experiment you can try. The ventilatory forces here, as we pull this, as you pull like the rubber diaphragm down, it expands the balloon in there. Whereas you let go of that and let that go up, it pushes air out of the balloon. So this is just kind of giving you an overview of, if you would like to go in and do that, experiment, but we're going to move on right now. All right, so we're going to skip over the experiment there, and we are going to go over kind of just a little overview of the respiratory system here. Air passing over the mucous membrane of the nasal cavity is moistened, warmed, and filtered. The pharynx, the passage back here just above the trachea, or the throat, is where those passages from either the nose or the mouth come together. Inside the lungs, the bronchi branch off the trachea into smaller tubes called bronchioles. And at the end, the air enters, at the end of the bronchioles are a bunch of alveoli or air sacs arranged like the grapes on a stem. If one lobe is injured or diseased, the other lobes may help function normally to let us carry on our life and may not even with little notice. So here are a few fun facts about the respiratory system. At rest, the body takes in and breathes in about 10 liters of air each minute. The right lung is slightly larger than the left, mainly being that the heart is on the left, and so the left lung is a little bit smaller to make room for the heart. The highest recorded sneeze speed is 165 kilometers per hour. The surface area of the lungs is roughly the same size as a tennis court. That's if you take the lungs out and, lay them flat out. The capillaries in the lungs would extend to 1,600 kilometers if placed end to end. Another fun fact here is we lose half a liter of water a day through our breathing. This is the water vapor, we see when you breathe onto glass. A person at rest usually breathes between 12 and 15 times a minute. And the last fun fact here is the breath rate or breathing rate is faster in children and women than it is in men. So if anybody would like to, here are a few key words that we kind of went over through this presentation, through our education here. And if you would like to look up or even take down some of those. A few more keywords continued. And of course, where we got some of our pictures. And thank you so much for being here for this education today. And that will end my education. Thank you.